The 7 craziest ideas Bernie had to try and improve F1. Shortcuts. Ways to improve overtaking seem pretty obvious in F1, less aero, but the powers that be in Formula 1 always seem to come up with some more different options. Let me set the scene for you. Bernie and his esteemed colleagues in the office trying to map out his next greatest idea. In 2010, Bernie suggested that each track should contain a shortcut that drivers could take a certain amount of times during the race. It would stop people getting stuck behind others and be good for TV, he said. It sounds a bit insane. And it is. However, the following year, DRS was introduced, and that hasn't been the solution to all of our problems now, has it? Sprinklers. Everyone loves a wet race, don't we? They're unpredictable, they shake up the order, and when the cars aren't behind the safety car, they are so good to watch. The problem is that no one can control the weather, so in 2011, Bernie suggested to install some sprinklers at some races to artificially wet the track. There are racetracks you can make artificially wet, and it would be easy to have such systems at a number of tracks. Why not let it rain in the middle of a race for 20 minutes, or the last 10 laps? Maybe with a 2-minute warning ahead of it. Suspense would be guaranteed. I'm going to pose a question to you now. Would it be suspenseful knowing when it's going to rain and how long it's going to rain for? In my opinion, no. It would cause chaos, and it would just be a lottery as to who would win each race. Medals. Ecclestone was probably the only person in the world who didn't think the title decider between Hamilton and Massa in 2008 was exciting. Apparently, he didn't like how Hamilton only had to cruise around and finish 5th to win the title. He'd have preferred it if he had to push for the win. Was he watching? As a result, he proposed a controversial medals system, which would have meant doing away with the points system altogether and crowning the world champion purely based on how many wins they'd have got. While there was some merit to the idea, it was generally met with a negative reaction. But there was nothing to worry about, because this was just another one of Bernie's wacky ideas, right? Wrong! The idea was actually going to be implemented for the 2009 season, but was quickly dropped, and he tried to gain support for it a number of times afterwards. Extra pit stops for winning drivers. Bernie's ideas aren't just restricted to recent times. No, we're going back a few years with this one. Back in the late 1980s, when McLaren were dominating, Bernie suggested making things even more even by introducing mandatory pit stops for winning drivers. If a driver won one race, they'd have to make at least one pit stop in every remaining race that year. If they won twice, they'd have to pit twice, up to a maximum of 3 extra pit stops per race throughout the season. So the idea was that the fastest drivers and teams would have to push harder throughout the race to beat the cars that didn't have to pit. Remember that pit stops weren't that common at the time, making races more exciting to watch. 2 races. One of his more recent ideas, Bernie said he'd like to see race weekends split up into 2 shorter races with a break in between. Cars would qualify on a Saturday as usual for the first race, and that would set the grid for the second. It would shake things up with lighter, faster cars, he explained. While that doesn't sound especially bonkers, his reasons for wanting the change were: all American sports have timeouts built in, mainly because American audiences can't concentrate. They grow up with everything in 15-minute segments on TV. People are the same everywhere now. Lottery qualifying. So not only did Bernie want to change the races, but also how the drivers went about qualifying too. The qualifying rules in F1 seem to change all the time, even though they really don't need to. While reverse grids always seem to be something that gets talked about, back in 2003, Bernie suggested something much worse: lottery qualifying. The idea was that the top 10 drivers would be given points for where they qualified and then be put into a draw to decide who would start where. Explaining his reasons for the concept, Bernie said at the time, you would have a different grid for sure, and all the guys who are in the top 10 would have a good chance of being on pole. There's ideas, and then there's just Bernie, like suggesting F1 should be more dangerous rather than safer. F1 should be more dangerous. In a time when Formula 1 is looking at improving safety with things like the Halo device, Bernie piped up with the well-timed suggestion that F1 should play up to the theatre of big accidents. What? First, he suggested that walls be built around every track to stop people from exploiting track limits and punish mistakes more heavily. A little extreme maybe, but you can kind of see where he's coming from. But he didn't stop there. Oh no! In 2016, Fernando Alonso had one of the most spectacular accidents seen in F1 for years, and he instantly crawled out of the car. Bernie didn't like that though, and said it should have been more dramatic. When you have a big shunt like Fernando's, we ought to put up big sheets around the scene. bring in the ambulance and take him away. He goes to hospital and later on you announce that, thank God, he's out. A bit of showbiz. People like that. What are my opinions on that? I mean, Bernie... What? No, that's not showbiz at all. No, cut, no. Now that he's no longer in charge, we hopefully don't have to worry about extreme ideas like these making their way into the sport. But I hope he keeps coming up with them. It's good to have a laugh every now and then, right?